Hello, my friends. This is a story about Faye Dunaway losing her head. And I'll give you a little background. In college in the 1960s, Doug Parker was a good friend of mine. Doug was enrolled in the School of Fine and Applied Arts. I was in the School of Liberal Arts. And one night, Doug and I went to a school play. Faye Dunaway had the lead. Faye Dunaway, even at that time, was considered a great actress locally around Boston. She had quite the reputation. We were freshmen, she was a senior, so she was way, way above us. We actually didn't go for her. We went because Doug had a good friend, Georgianne Boyle, and Georgianne was a sophomore at SFAA. So we went to see her. And I think the name of the play was Brand. I say I think, even though I know it wasn't. I don't know why I said it was Brand. I went to see Brand later in that same year in the spring, 6 months later. And I went to see it with my soon-to-become wife, Tony Lee. It was one of our first dates. It was wonderful. So it wasn't Brand. Anyway, we went to see Georgianne. And I think it was Act 2, Scene 2. And I'm pretty sure it was. I know it better than the name of the play. Anyway, Georgianne came out, and she was lovely. But her voice was mesmerizing, dreamy and soft. Wow. And her eyes scanned the audience, and I was sure that she was looking at me, and she did find me, and we looked at each other. I was sure of it. I fell in love. It was my first love, but how could you not? She was pretty amazing. So at my urging, Doug and I went backstage after the play to greet Georgianne, in my case, to meet Georgianne. And of course, Faye was there, and it was a small area. There was a big crowd around Faye, but we managed to pay her a compliment, and she said something fairly dismissive. She was scanning the crowd for someone that she would really like to talk with. So I didn't see Faye again for 15 years, or maybe 20, but 15 years after that, when I was in the restaurant business, and I had a restaurant called Dom's, which had become prominent in the rock and roll scene. And why did we? Well, because our food was very good, our service was very good, and our prices were high, which catered to these new young millionaires. And but mostly, I think, it was because we opened after hours. It was illegal, but no one ever stopped us. We never got caught, and there we were. So the rock and roll groups wouldn't finish their concerts until midnight. Where were they going? In Boston. Boston's not a late night city. So they came to Dom's. We fixed it so that we were private and they were safe. Peter Wolf, who was the lead for the J. Giles Band, was a regular. He, being a Bostonian, the whole band was Bostonian. But Peter was a real late night guy, and he was there all the time. Peter was married to Faye Dunaway, and Faye became a good customer in her own right. Now, the restaurant occupied the ground floor of a building on the emerging waterfront, and my family lived in the floors above it. So from time to time, when there was a particular celebrity that the boys liked, my boys at the time I'm talking, the mid-70s, 9, 11, and 13. And when there was a particular group, for example, Kiss was the big one. I mean, Kiss, they were fanatic Kiss followers. But in the course of, I'm sorry, and I would take them, I would wake them and bring them downstairs to meet the celebrity if they had a special affinity, a special like for them. And during these excursions, they all came to know Faye Dunaway and very friendly with her. She was very solicitous of them, and it was great. And so when Richard Lester came out with his movie 1974, The Four Musketeers, Faye Dunaway had a role in it. She was Milady de Winter, a character as evil as her name sounded. Yeah. So we went to see her. And in the course of the movie, Faye, being the bad character that she portrayed, had her head chopped off. Which was okay for the most part, except my youngest son, Christopher, who was 9 at the time, who took things very literally, saw her head chopped off. I mean, it really was chopped off. It fell and plopped in the basket. He began to cry, to bawl out loud. All night he was very upset, and no matter what any of us said to him, we couldn't dissuade him from his opinion that Faye wasn't dead. It was just a movie, and she was alive and well. No. Wouldn't take it. One night, I get a call from Faye, and Peter Wolf is on tour, and she wanted to come in, but she didn't want to eat alone, and would I sit with her? Well, would I? Of course. Anyway, she comes in, she sits down, she orders, I remember, a bottle of Schramsberg Blanc de Blanc, a domestic sparkling wine made in the method of champagne. And it became famous because when Richard Nixon was president, that was his wine of choice at the dinner parties that he had, really fine American sparkling wine. So while we're talking, suddenly the idea flashed, and I proposed it to Faye. Would she mind if I brought Christopher down? Yeah, this is now 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night. Chris is long asleep. But of course she didn't mind, and I went upstairs, and I lifted him out of his bed. He was still asleep, but kind of waking up as I carried him down the stairs and carried him over to Faye's table. And he was sitting on my lap and wondering what he was doing there. My goodness, and trying to focus, and his eyes were closed, and they began to stay open for a bit longer, and he blinked and tried to focus at the person across the table from him. She was interesting because she looked familiar. He blinked. His eyes stayed open. He focused. And then from ear to ear, he grinned. It was her. She was alive, and she had her head on her shoulder. And he looked at me, and his eyes asked the question, "But Daddy, we saw them chop her head off." What we saw was pretend, I told him. And I got up from the table, and I handed him to Faye, who put him on her lap. And she hugged him and she kissed him. And everybody in the dining room realized something was going on. And when she kissed him, everyone clapped. It was a nice scene. And then I picked him up, I took him, and finally I put him to bed, and with peace and the reassurance and fatigue, he fell right back to sleep. But it was a lovely moment, and something I'm never going to forget.